What does Duke have up its sleeves for the Tar Heels tomorrow? Let's find out from Locked On Blue Devils host JJ Jackson.
You are Locked On Tar Heels, your daily podcast on the UNC Tar Heels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's up? It's Friday, September 27th, 2024. Welcome into the Locked On Tar Heels podcast, the only daily North Carolina show out there. I'm your host, Isaac Shade, and you're joining me at the place to get your Carolina content every single day. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for making us your first listener watch, and I want to give a special shout out to all the everydayers joining us, all the members of the Locked On Tar Heels Discord, and our brand new Locked On Tar Heels insiders. Come on in, everybody. The water's fine. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Hey, we've got two shows today on Friday. One is our typical Friday football preview show with myself and Denora Searcy, Tar Heel and NFL player. But also we have this second show. This is myself and a crossover with our good buddy JJ Jackson of Locked On Blue Devils, who does a great job for them. And together we are about to get you set up for this game. Let's dive right in. When we get the Tar Heels and Blue Devils together, you might think it would already be basketball season, and thankfully we did just get that conference schedule this week, but no, it is football season. It's the kickoff, the ACC opener for both the Blue Devils and Tar Heels at Wallace Wade Stadium coming up tomorrow afternoon, interestingly enough, and that means it's time for a crossover between the Locked On Blue Devils and the Locked On Tar Heels. So we got JJ Jackson, the host of Locked On Blue Devils, and myself, Isaac Shade, the host of Locked On Tar Heels. Folks, if you're joining us from whichever of the two schools, or maybe you're a state fan that's hate watching this thing, welcome in, and we're glad you are here. Here's how this is going to roll. This first segment, we're going to look at the Blue Devils and what they're going on that's led to this 4-0 start to the season. Next segment, we'll put me in the hot seat, and we'll talk about the Tar Heels and maybe try to avoid last weekend, JJ, at all costs. And then we'll wrap this thing up, talking some key storylines, making predictions on the game, and get out of here. And folks, thanks so much for tuning in. So JJ, I just said it. Blue Devils under Manny Diaz, now 4-0 to start this season. What has led to this undefeated run?
Yeah, what a good start it's been for Duke on their side of things, right? A new head coach, really excited about what the last 2 years have brought under head coach Mike Elko, but he gets the opportunity to go and be the Texas A&M head coach. And so you're really curious, what does this new era kind of look like? And I go all the way back to December, just prior to kickoff of Duke's Birmingham Bowl game against Troy, when they learned that Maalik Murphy was going to transfer to Duke out of the transfer portal. And anytime you look at any football team, there's going to be a big conversation about the Tar Heels and what they've got going on in that quarterback room. You start at quarterback, and Maalik Murphy taking care of the football, being able to move up and down the field has been a big, big reason why this Duke team has been able to start off undefeated. A Duke team, by the way, that the over-under was set at 5.5 wins, and here they are with their first perfect run through non-conference play since 2018. 4 wins down. They're already exceeding expectations by many, Isaac. I think there's plenty of reason to be excited about Manny Diaz's first year.
Well, let's talk about Maalik Murphy, because JJ, man, it's been a great start. I was actually looking at his numbers earlier on Thursday. Over 200 passing yards in every game so far, at least 2 TD passes in every game so far, including 3 in each of the last 3 games, man. He's stepping into this thing. Obviously, Jordan Moore is back for another great year. What is it that makes Maalik Murphy so special early on in his Duke career?
Dude, some of his arm talent and the throws that he's able to make are just incredible. Airing it out to the likes of Jordan Moore, who's been Duke's premier wide receiver so far. Eli Panickel's back for another season. He's made a lot of nice plays. Many of his catches end up in the end zone. That might be the only catches that he makes in a game, but at least he's making it count for something. The young Quayshawn Brown has had big games so far this season in that receiving room, so able to connect early with a lot of these wide receivers. Murphy has had 1 interception in every game so far this season. But what I like, Isaac, is that has not derailed his performance whatsoever. Against UConn, his pick 6, if Tar Heel fans did not see it, I would encourage them to go back and watch the replay. It was one of the wildest interception returns for a touchdown that I've ever seen before. A ball kind of batted down at the line of scrimmage. A DN just happens to be in the right place at the right time, and he's off to the races off the weird ricochet. So I've loved that despite those interceptions, he's still able to move the Duke football team forward in the right direction. And over the last 2 weeks, he's had a ground game out of the backfield with Star Thomas that has able to complement kind of what Duke's trying to do through the year.
By the way, folks, for those of you who don't know, JJ is a great play-by-play guy on the TV. And so, JJ, I would have loved to – I hadn't thought about it till just now. I would love to hear your call of that crazy pick.
Yeah, exactly.
No, that's great. Let's talk about Mr. Thomas because, he's the running back that's kind of coming on over 100 yards each of the past 2 weeks. What can Tar Heel fans expect from him? Is he a shifty, grifty guy? Is he more grounded pound? What are we watching for?
Shifty, grifty, I think is the perfect way to describe him. In his first year playing for Duke after transferring over from New Mexico State 2 weeks ago, prior to the UConn game, about 2 days before, he actually was able to welcome into the world his first child. His son was born 2 days before, and he's followed it up with 2 consecutive 100-yard rushing performances. So probably not getting a whole lot of sleep right now in those first 2 weeks of being a father, but man, he's been playing really well out on the football field. He's got an incredible name. I mean, Star Thomas, he's been playing like a star these past couple of weeks, but yeah, he's definitely kind of lightning in the bottle type of running back who's been really, really effective.
So no more kids going to be born before Saturday, right? Just to make sure.
Exactly.
Because I'm not looking for more, newborn strength that he apparently got from that. No, look, okay, so Manny Diaz is going to be so angry that we've not yet talked about defense as we're talking about the Blue Devils, because obviously that's his calling card. For those who are unaware, the Blue Devils heading into the weekend are number 1 in the nation in TFLs and number 2 in the nation in sacks behind only Miami's 16. So where's that coming from, JJ? Is it the front being really experienced? Is the secondary doing a great job in coverage? Are the linebackers cleaning up? What's allowing this to happen?
Can all the above be an option? Because I think that's
unfortunately, yes, it can be.
I think that's the direction that I'm going to go there because as we've outlined for people, I think when you look at this game in particular, a lot of it will come down to what Duke's defense is able to do against North Carolina's front. Can they impact the passing game and kind of contain Omarion Hampton and what he's been able to do in the backfield for the Tar Heels? Duke lost a lot on the defensive front from last season's team, but what's been nice is other guys stepping up. There really weren't that many additions via the transfer portal, surprisingly for Duke, on that defensive front, but guys like Wesley Williams have taken that next step forward. VJ Anthony is making a whole lot of plays on the edge for Duke, and in their linebacker room, Cam Bergeron has been one of my most exciting and favorite players to watch. And the secondary is just doing an awesome job of keeping guys in front and not getting beat over the top. So, yeah, Manny Diaz, to your point, takes a whole lot of pride on defense. His defensive coordinator, Jonathan Packey, was at Texas State last season. They were very high in FBS ranks in the tackles for loss and sacks department. Both of those guys worked together, Packey under Miami, when Manny Diaz was the coach at Miami. So familiarity with one another. And yeah, it's been awesome to watch that defense play for Duke.
Okay, there we go. That's a little bit of some setup on Duke for the Tar Heel side of the equation. Unfortunately, we're going to turn the hot lamp on me. And as I said, avoid at all costs anything about anybody named Alonzo Barnett III coming up in our next segment. But that's where we're going to go. JJ's going to grill me a little bit coming up in just a second. Right after I tell you about Robinhood. Robinhood Gold allows others to get the rates and perks usually reserved for the high society. Now, the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn the very liberal rate of 4.5% APY on uninvested cash, receive unlimited 1% direct deposit bonuses, and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on an IRA account. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of a high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for just $5 a month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply. For product-specific disclosures, visit robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. Rate may change, and gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold, LLC.
All right, welcome back in. It's a Locked On crossover. I'm JJ Jackson from Locked On Blue Devils. He's Isaac Shade from Locked On Tar Heels. Tomorrow we have Duke versus North Carolina, the first ACC game for both schools. A different way to kick off the season. I will say, Isaac, the common thing that I hear from Duke fans is we just really wish this game was at the end of the season, as it is with the other fine rivalries in the sport. I don't know if the Tar Heels have the same sentiment there, but this is just odd, man, that this is the game that we've got to kind of kick off ACC play.
I completely agree with you, JJ. For a while now, Carolina's final game of the year has been NC State, which is, that older rivalry that's there. But I wish both were at the end of the season. I just think that would be so much fun for the Triangle area, and that it would kind of flip-flop. Like, I wish it was State the last game one year, Duke the last game the other, and that you could go back and forth with that. But yeah, typically it's been I feel like it's been in the middle of the ACC schedule the last couple years. And here we get it to kick off ACC play. And interestingly, both teams playing all their non-conference games to start the season. I wonder if that has something to do with just like a new era kind of for both schools in terms of head coach for you guys at Duke and for Carolina in the post-Sam Howell, post-Drake May, new defensive coordinator with Jeff Collins coming in era. If it's like, hey, let's load up on non-con early so that we can kind of figure out a little bit more of who we are, which unfortunately Carolina lost some of that identity last week.
Well, we're going to get to see it all unfold on Saturday now with 8 consecutive conference games for both of these schools. They've got 2 bye weeks, as does everybody in FBS, built into the schedule this season. So that'll be something to navigate in the weeks to come. But our focus is on this matchup. And when we start to look at this North Carolina team, Isaac, let's take the loss last week out of the picture. Let's start at the beginning of the year. Both of these teams have already played Big Ten schools on the road. For Duke, it was a double overtime victory against Northwestern. North Carolina started their season on the road at Minnesota in what turned out to be a really thrilling finish to that football game. Unfortunately, however, it was a big injury to Max Johnson, the quarterback who comes in. So for that to kind of be the first game, how do you feel the North Carolina football team responded to that injury to Max Johnson, knowing so many people were talking about him going into the year?
It's a great question. Here's the interesting thing, JJ. So much of this offseason was for the North Carolina chatter. Is it going to be Max Johnson or is it going to be Connor Harrell? Who's going to replace Drake May? Because in Mac Brown 2.0, it's only been Sam Howell or Drake May. That's all that Carolina has known. And there was this obvious drop-off that was going to happen because Carolina didn't really reload well at quarterback through the transfer portal. But the good news for Tar Heels is that there was this guy in the backfield named Omarion Hampton, who you referenced earlier, that it's like, I can't count the number of times I said this summer, it doesn't really matter who wins this starting job because 28's right behind him. And that's what you do is you just make sure you turn around and hand it off the right way. And that's going to cure all your ails. And so it obviously devastating for the Johnson family. His parents were in the stands, his dad, an NFL quarterback, watching Max go down like that. You hate that when he had won the starting job, coming over, ironically enough, from Texas A&M. And then in comes Connor Harrell, who had been in the Carolina system. And he helped Carolina kind of escape Minnesota, quite frankly, and then had the opportunity to be QB1 coming after that and never really snatched it. So, JJ, what happens is Jacolby Criswell, who had been at Carolina, been neck and neck with Drake May to be QB1 a couple years ago, lost that job. Last year transferred to Arkansas, where he was also the backup. This summer decided to come back to Carolina, knowing that he would be QB3. And now all of a sudden, here he is elevated to QB1 after the Johnson injury and after Connor Harrell can't really grab the bull by the proverbial horns.
And so it's been a lot of the running game then, because you do have 28 in the backfield. I mean, how much of a focus truly has that been? How has the offensive line held up through the first 4 games? What does that kind of picture looked like?
If you talk about the offensive line, JJ, and you had said 3 instead of 4 in that question, I would have said they've held up pretty well. Last week, though, was a whole different story. As Omarion Hampton and Jacolby Criswell both were getting beat up pretty good in the backfield as James Madison was finding their way through the offensive line, which has had a couple injuries. They were down 2 starters a couple weeks ago. And so really curious to see how they respond to that, the offensive line, especially against this Duke front. Because as we said, JJ, Duke leads the nation in tackles for loss. Well, guess what? Carolina is 98th in tackles for loss allowed. Duke is 2nd in the nation in most sacks. Carolina is 80th in the nation in most sacks allowed. Wow. So that, my friend, is not a good recipe for this thing. However, the good news is that Omarion Hampton leads like the world in yards after contact. And so thankfully he is someone that can survive through that, even if he's getting beat up a little bit. One of the things with Jacolby Criswell specifically is that he's not kind of similar to Maalik Murphy, is not by any stretch of the imagination someone I would call a dual threat quarterback. He is a pocket passer. Even in getting beat up and harassed last week, he threw for the 3rd most single season passing yards single game, passing yards in Carolina history. 475 through the air last week, more than Drake May ever threw in his career. And so you just look at that and it's like, okay, so if the offensive line can hold up, what could Hampton and Criswell do?
So when we look at North Carolina and the offensive line's holding up, maybe you're not running the football. I want to look at the passing game before we turn it over to the Tar Heels defense. And what's been kind of interesting to follow from the outside, the last couple of years, Duke fans know everything there is to know, unfortunately, about Josh Downs and the plays that he would make. But so far in 2024, Isaac, it's been the tight ends that are being utilized more than anything in the Tar Heels passing game. What's been the reason for that? Who are these wide receivers that don't seem to be as known since the tight ends are featured so heavily?
Well, it's funny, you mentioned Josh Downs, and then last year the big name that everyone knew was Tez Walker transferring in because of his ineligibility fight with the NCAA. But actually lurking behind was J.J. Jones, who I come so close to calling you all the time, oh, by the way, who was actually Carolina's leading receiver last year, not Tez Walker. And I mean, truthfully, was because of the ineligibility, and then he got hurt later in the season. But I bring that up to say J.J. Jones has not really been able to establish himself very much this year yet. And I think part of that is because Max Johnson, prototypical pocket passer, that was not Connor Harrell's game. Enter Jacolby Criswell, that is his game. So I'm curious to see the receivers got going a little bit more last week. JJ, I believe, had 7 for like 80 or 90, something like that. But it truly has been the tight ends, and the 2 guys you need to know are Bryson Nesbit, who is kind of this prototypical NFL body type, can really be a wide receiver tight end. And then John Copenhaver, who is more the blocking tight end, but has flourished in the passing game this year, actually has 2 touchdowns, I believe, right now. And both of those have been on scampers down the sideline. In fact, Carolina switched last week and started both of those guys in place of 3 wide receivers. Nate McCullum has been a little bit banged up, the Georgia Tech transfer from 2 years ago. And so Carolina just said, you know what? Screw it. Our tight end room's awesome. Yeah. Let's roll with that. And so that has been successful, and we'll continue to see if that happens this week as well.
All right, so now we talk defense, and this has been a big talking point across the ACC. A lot of fun on the Locked On ACC show, talking about what the Tar Heels did defensively this past week in the game against James Madison. 70 hung on the scoreboard. You look at this defensive unit for North Carolina, familiar face. You mentioned him earlier, Jeff Collins, spends 5 seasons as the Georgia Tech head coach. Now he's UNC's defensive coordinator. What's been going on that side of the ball? What should Duke expect offensively?
What's funny is, JJ, prior to last week, Carolina had actually looked really good on defense, which had not been their calling card the last couple of years with Gene Chizik, who had kind of frankly struggled as he entered his way back into being a DC. Carolina, the first 3 weeks of the season, did not allow a single team to rush for more than 77 yards on the ground. Last week, both Alonzo Barnett, James Madison's quarterback, individually rushed for more than that, and James Madison's running back, George Pettaway, also rushed for more than that individually by himself, which is equally or doubly painful because he used to be a Tar Heel. So, man, that script really flipped last week, JJ. And so this is going to there were not only that, but multiple coverage busts last week where there was like a free play from an offside from Carolina, and D-backs are just letting guys run free instead of like Hey, in college football, it's just a 15-yard penalty for DPI, so just tackle the dude instead of letting him run free. But it was just lack of communication last week. One of the things Coach Collins talked about in this week's press conference was, I did not do a good enough job simplifying my play calls last week, interestingly enough. I think I was causing guys to think too much instead of just playing and reacting and be able to communicate well. So that's what we're going to be watching for. Is there better communication this week? Cedric Gray, Carolina's longtime stud linebacker, is out the door. Power Eccles, his partner in crime last year, is now the leader in that linebacking unit. But one of the good pieces of news for Duke is that Kamen Rucker, Carolina's great end, has been on the shelf for a couple weeks now with a lower body injury and will not be available for this game. And so we'll look to see how that defensive line holds up for Carolina. Can they get into the backfield and cause some pressure on Maalik Murphy?
That's going to be something that North Carolina tries to do, certainly. And I think this is going to be a chess match for two head coaches who know each other quite well. Mack Brown leading the Tar Heels, once employed Manny Diaz in Texas. And then, of course, had some matchups when Manny Diaz was the head coach at Miami, Mack Brown at UNC. More on that kind of coaching matchup and what else we expect to happen with this game coming up after our final timeout here on this Locked On crossover. The show today is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. We absolutely love our friends at FanDuel this time of year. Football season is amazing. We're looking at the game tomorrow, and you've got Duke right now favored by 2.5 points. Going to be a close one there at Wallace Wade Stadium. And also the NFL is awesome this time of year, and you can get a start to the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. How awesome was that game last night we saw in the NFL, an NFC Classic matchup between the Cowboys and the Giants? You're able on FanDuel to view live play-by-play. You could see the latest stats and so much more on the same page where you place your bet. The best part, you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. FanDuel is a proud sponsor of the Locked On Podcast Network. Welcome back, Locked On Crossover. Take it over for us, Isaac.
I'm trying to step over your words. JJ, man, you said it coming into the break. This is a full circle Texas moment coming back together. Mack Brown and Manny Diaz were together. Not only was Mack Brown his employer, he was also Manny Diaz's firer because he let him go after a particularly woeful defensive game. And of course, as you mentioned earlier, Maalik Murphy transfers in from Texas. So we're just horns up, Austin, Texas. Let's rock with that tomorrow, baby. Sorry to all the Oklahoma fans who are definitely tuning into this show. But look, here's the deal. We come into this game tomorrow, Saturday, September 28th. Series record. It's funny, JJ. The two teams have discrepancy. Carolina's says it's 65-40-4. Duke's says it's 65-38-4 in favor of North Carolina. If I'm a Carolina, I'd be like, yeah, we'll take Duke's record, what they say it is. But this is either the 108th or 110th meeting between these two schools for the Liberty Bell. Obviously, as we've said, Duke comes in 4-0, Carolina 3-1. This game will be at 4:00 Eastern on ESPN2, with Duke favored by 2.5 points by our friends at FanDuel. JJ, it's kind of weird. We come into this with North Carolina on a 5-game winning streak in the series. 3 of those 5 games have been by 3 points or fewer, including that crazy 2 overtime game last year where Duke converted that 4th and 7 to take a lead with like 40 seconds left. Carolina somehow sneaks in a field goal and then wins in double overtime. Are you expecting to see more of that close, heart palpitating action tomorrow?
Isaac, dude, I think you have to. I think you've got to expect that with how the series has played out as of late. We talk so much about quarterbacks, and Riley Leonard has had some classic games of his own as Duke's quarterback in this series. Now he's at Notre Dame as their quarterback, which has allowed Maalik Murphy to step into the fold. I just mentioned last night's game between the Cowboys and Giants. Daniel Jones got the start for the Giants. He was the last quarterback for Duke to beat the Tar Heels. It's been that long for the guys in Durham to have the bell painted in the right shade of blue. So It's long overdue, but I do think when you look at a game like this, a rivalry, a series like this, throw everything out. It's cliche, but it's so true, man. Like, this game is going to be a classic. I think it definitely will be a one-possession game.
JJ, what are you watching for in terms of either major storylines or maybe a key matchup to watch out for so fans can be more educated as they're watching this thing?
I think we have highlighted it right on the screen. If you're watching on YouTube, go ahead, by the way, and subscribe to both of our YouTube channels. Really appreciate the support over there. But how can you not be locked in on what Duke's defense has done? And then that North Carolina offensive line, they really want to establish the run, especially on the road, Isaac. I mean, playing in Durham at Wallace Wade Stadium, give this Duke fan base credit. They've been turning out these first few weeks under head coach Manny Diaz. Credit again to Mike Elko for kind of creating some winning type culture these last couple of seasons for Duke football. And that's just carried over with what the program's been able to do. And so North Carolina, I think you have to be able to run the ball if you want to be successful tomorrow against Duke. And for Duke, they've got to stop the run. They've got to create those negative plays, those tackles for loss to force Jacolby Criswell to duplicate what he did last week. Like, yeah, he had 475 yards passing, but is that really who he is? Or is that against a James Madison defense who's subpar? Like, let's find out those things by Duke's defense creating that pressure. That's the matchup I'm looking at. And I think you'd be in the same boat there, Isaac.
Absolutely. That is far and away the key matchup to watching this game, because JJ, I think if we're thinking about all 6 units, like special teams for both, offense for both, defense for both, I think the Duke defense is the most trusted and consistent out of those 6. And so that is like, if Carolina is going to win, they're going to have to overcome what Duke has put on film 4 straight weeks now. And no shock, given what you were mentioning earlier about obviously Manny Diaz, but then who he's gotten as defensive coordinator and how that tandem is really allowing these Blue Devils to thrive on the defensive side of the football. But then JJ, my other big thing would be exactly what you mentioned. And I talked about this on Locked On Tar Heels for today's show as well, is what is Jacolby Criswell's follow-up? What is his encore to what happened last Saturday? Because yes, as you said, there's the 475 yards, but it's against a team that frankly had gone on a 42-7 run against you to close out the first half. And it's like, they've kind of already packed it up mentally and are heading back to Virginia, right? And so can he do that? That is Jacolby Criswell's calling card, is his arm. Can he find the touch? Can he avoid the pick 6 and the fumble as well that he had last week? You got to see that happen. And then on the other side of the ball, JJ, I got to tell you, the Carolina fan base was feeling so good about the defense through the first 3 games, and now was absolutely mortified after what happened last week. I do not know which version of Jeff Collins' unit is going to show up in Wallace Wade Stadium tomorrow, and I think it's going to be very telling as we enter into ACC play for the first time, which version of the defense happens and how Carolina, really frankly on both sides of the ball, can manage that crowd that you were talking about that continues to show up. In fact, I was talking with Denoris Searcy, Tar Heel football player, played for the Bills and all these things, was talking about, man, I think one of the most critical things Carolina is going to have to be able to do in this game is to avoid allowing the crowd to overwhelm them.
Without a doubt. And I think that's so big for that North Carolina team to stay locked in, this Duke team to use that crowd to their advantage on the defensive side of the ball, right? You want to make sure that Criswell and his offensive line and his receivers have those communication issues and whatnot. And then I think when you look at kind of the storylines with this game, we mentioned it a little bit earlier, a little weird. It's the first ACC game of the season for both of these schools. But with that being said, there's still so much football beyond Saturday, beyond tomorrow to be played. How can a game like this set you up for the rest of the year? Both of these teams definitely on their way to being bowl eligible, right? Can you compete for the ACC? There's this expanded college football playoff. I get those are stretches, right? But that's still what these guys want to be playing for at the end of the day. And this is just another game kind of on their journey. And unfortunately, that's the outlook you kind of have to have on a game like this when it is so early in the season and so many games left on the back half of your schedule.
JJ, as you're talking, it almost makes it feel like it's the first Duke Carolina game of the basketball season, right? Where you got the other one later, but it's like this one matters in such a big way, but there's so much more basketball to be played. We're reckoning with that, as you said, in a lot of ways, the ACC is pretty wide open because we all thought that Florida State team was going to be the juggernaut, right? And they're clearly not. Clemson, I might add, has looked much better since that loss they took couple weeks ago. Boston College looks better than expected. Georgia Tech, who I believe Duke goes on the road to next, right?
Yep.
And they've looked better, but I think there are a lot of opportunities for either and maybe both of these teams to make some waves in our conference. Duke is on a better footing right now, continuing to be undefeated. So how can they start their journey throughout the rest of the ACC by knocking off Carolina? For Carolina, it's all about like, you cannot allow one loss to turn into two at this point. And what better way to do that than knocking off your rival? Kind of like, Notre Dame took that loss to Northern Illinois and then just spanked Purdue the next week. Carolina's like, can we figure out how to do that on Saturday and set ourselves on a better path and towards, at least bowl eligibility. And then once you've achieved that, then you can get beyond. But JJ, the storyline for Carolina the past 2 years has been the letdowns at the end of the season. Right now, they got to stop that from happening at the beginning of the ACC.
I'm excited to see this game play out. I think it's going to be a good one. I like where the Duke football team is at. I really do, Isaac. I think they're long overdue. Shocker, the Duke host today is going to be predicting a Blue Devil win in this one. I think it's close, though. Like I said, I think it is a one-possession football game. I see like a 28-24 type of football game being played in Duke's favor.
Here's what's funny, JJ. I literally on my show predicted within 3 points exactly what you just said. I had Carolina winning this thing 31-24, which would also not only cover, but win outright. So that's where I'm going with it on the Tar Heels side of things.
I can't wait to watch this game unfold, Isaac. And look, I know that, like you said, this game comes, it goes. We've got the rest of football season. But fear not, many crossovers have happened between Isaac and I here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Many more are coming because it's basketball season right around the corner, man. Count down the craziness, the late night events for UNC in the weeks to come, and we'll certainly have some crossovers coming their way as well, Isaac, right?
Right. It's going to be electric. I cannot wait to humble Cooper Flag.
That's going to be epic, man.
No, it should be a great year for both schools on the basketball court. Everybody has Tar Heels and Blue Devils, top two in the conference, man. That's how it's supposed to be because college basketball is better when both our schools are better. Let's get there. But first, let's happen on the gridiron tomorrow. Big thanks to JJ Jackson for giving us some insight into what Duke's got going on this year, what has helped them get off to this 4-0 start, which is about to be 4-1. We all know it, right? Yeah, absolutely. Wallace Wade is going to be very sad on Saturday. If you haven't subscribed to our show on video and audio, go ahead and make sure you do that so you don't miss a second of Locked On Tar Heels. We'll be live right after the game tomorrow. So you're going to want to make sure that you've hit that bell notification on YouTube so you get notified when I go live and you can just tap right on in. If you haven't joined the Locked On Tar Heels Discord, we'd love to have you there as well. It's a great place. It's a safe place for Tar Heels fans where, man, we just have a lot of great conversation. If you're not part of it already, the link is in the show notes, and great news, it's free to join. We'd absolutely love to have you. If you'd like to go to a deeper level where you can have one-on-one direct texting conversation with me, I'd love you to join our new Locked On Tar Heels Insider program. Not only that, I give you primary access to our mailbag questions where you get priority. You get to have free access to all of my charts and stats and data and all that great stuff that I keep. And so that you get a 2-week free trial of that, and it's just $5 a month after that. The link is also in the show notes if you want to check that out. It's always a great day to be a Tar Heel. It'll be even better when we deal with the Blue Devils tomorrow. But until then, peace.